The universe, in its infinite complexity and occasional bursts of cosmic irony, had developed approximately 47,000 sentient species across 12 galaxies. Of these, roughly 46,993 had mastered the fundamental principles of thermodynamics, energy conservation, and advanced food preservation techniques. The remaining 7 were either too newly spacefaring to count, or were humans who had mastered thermodynamics just fine, but seemed to prefer ignoring it in favor of what they called winging it. The Kolathi were decidedly not among those 7. The Kolathi had emerged from their homeworld of Tekrish Prime with an evolutionary advantage that would have made most xenobiologists weep with envy. Their chitinous bodies regulated temperature with mechanical precision. Their compound eyes could detect thermal signatures across 17 spectrums, and their entire civilization had been built upon the sacred principle that food must be preserved at exactly 2.7 degrees Kelvin until the moment of consumption. They had cryogenic storage units that could maintain quantum-level stability for centuries. They had transport vessels with redundant cooling systems, backed up by tertiary redundancies that were themselves backed up by systems so advanced. They had their own dedicated AIs, which made it particularly embarrassing when colony transport vessel Infinite Preservation came screaming through the atmosphere of designated planet KX-447 like a 300-ton frozen dinner someone had left in the oven too long. The crash itself was almost elegant by catastrophic standards. The vessel skipped across the ice fields twice, carved a trench approximately 4 kilometers long, and came to rest against a glacier with all the grace of a drunk uncle falling into a wedding cake. Emergency systems flickered to life, damage reports scrolled across every functioning display, and Chief Navigator Klechnor stood in the command center with his mandibles clicking in what could only be described as profound cosmic disappointment. The good news was that all 472 crew members had survived. The bad news was that KX-447 was an ice planet where the ambient temperature hovered around -140 degrees Celsius. Their primary engines were thoroughly destroyed. Their communication array was functioning at approximately 12% capacity, and most critically, catastrophically, universe-endingly worst of all, their cryogenic food storage had suffered a complete contamination failure. Klechnor stared at the readout with the kind of hollow despair usually reserved for philosophers contemplating the heat death of the universe. 4 months of supplies contaminated, backups compromised, emergency rations exposed to temperature fluctuations that had rendered them into something the computer diplomatically described as nutritionally questionable biological matter. The Kolathi did not eat warm food. The concept was alien to them in the most literal sense. Their digestive systems had evolved to process cryogenically preserved nutrients at specific molecular states. Warming food above freezing didn't just make it unpalatable, it made it genuinely toxic to their biology. They needed their food frozen, precisely frozen, and they needed it to stay that way. "Send the distress beacon," Klechnor said, his voice carrying the exhausted tone of someone whose day had gone from bad to catastrophically worse too, and now we are all going to die on an ice ball in the middle of nowhere. The distress signal went out with all the urgency their damaged communications array could muster, which was roughly equivalent to a polite cough in a crowded room. The response from the galactic community was, in a word, disappointing. The Varathni Empire sent their regrets, but noted that their rescue vessels were not equipped for sub-zero operations, and perhaps the Kolathi should have considered this before crashing. The Kolathi consortium filed the distress call under low-priority environmental hazard situations and promised someone would review it within 6 to 8 standard weeks. The Zephic Unity offered thoughts and prayers, which was generous of them but did absolutely nothing to address the whole starving to death on an ice planet situation. 14 species responded with variations of "that sounds rough, good luck with that." 3 more sent detailed instructions on how to properly file insurance claims for lost cargo. One particularly unhelpful civilization sent back a recipe for ice sculptures, apparently having misunderstood the nature of the emergency entirely. The Kolathi huddled in their damaged vessel, watching their power reserves drain, their temperature regulation systems struggle against the hostile environment, and their food supplies transform into increasingly abstract states of matter. They were, by any objective measure, in serious trouble. Which was when the Wandering Kettle picked up their signal. The Wandering Kettle was not, by any stretch of charitable imagination, a proper rescue vessel. It was a Lumina-class cargo hauler that had been decommissioned, recommissioned, sold for scrap, rescued from a scrap yard, modified with parts that probably violated at least 47 safety regulations, and was currently held together by what Captain Marcus Venn cheerfully described as determination and spite. Marcus was in the mess hall when the distress call came through, halfway through a cup of coffee that had been reheated at least 3 times, and was now achieving a consistency that coffee should not naturally possess. "Captain, we have got a distress beacon," called out Rodrigo Chen from the cockpit, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested he was already regretting bringing it up. Marcus set down his coffee mug, which made a sound suspiciously like it was setting rather than sitting. "Ice planet, about 4 hours off our current route. Kolathi vessel looks like they had a crash landing. Food supplies contaminated, crew stranded, ambient temperature is holy mother of hypothermia, cold." Anyone else responding? 14 declinations, 6 unable to assist, and 3 messages that are basically sounds like a you problem. Marcus scratched his beard, which had reached that length where it was either going to become a proper beard or he was going to have to make decisions about his life. "What is our cargo situation?" 70% capacity, nothing perishable, nothing urgent. We could afford the detour. From the engine room, Chief Engineer Paula Okonkwo's voice crackled through the intercom with the long-suffering patience of someone who had been having this conversation with Marcus for 7 years. "Please tell me you are not about to volunteer us for another unscheduled rescue mission. Would it help if I said I was thinking about it really hard and probably would not? No. Then I have got bad news about our travel plans." The Wandering Kettle altered course with all the enthusiasm of a teenager being told to clean their room, which is to say it made concerning noises and did it anyway. 4 hours later, they descended through KX 447's atmosphere into a landscape that looked like the universe's freezer had exploded. The Kolathi vessel was easy to spot, mostly because it was a massive metallic structure that definitely did not belong on a planet that had apparently never heard of temperatures above freezing. The Wandering Kettle settled down about 200 meters away, landing gear crunching into ice with a sound that made Paula wince from the engine room. Marcus bundled up in every layer of thermal gear the ship possessed, looking less like a starship captain and more like a very determined marshmallow. Rodrigo and Paula joined him, along with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the ship's medic/cook/person who had once successfully performed surgery during a meteor storm and considered it decent practice. They trudged across the ice toward the Kolathi vessel, boots crunching, breath fogging, and Marcus was reasonably certain he could feel his eyebrows freezing. The Kolathi emerged to meet them, and if insects could look simultaneously desperate and deeply skeptical, they were managing it beautifully. Klechnor stood at the front of the group, his mandibles clicking in the Kolathi equivalent of extreme stress. "You are human." "Last time I checked," Marcus said cheerfully, "Captain Marcus Venn of the Wandering Kettle got your distress call. Figured we would see if we could help. Our food supplies are contaminated. Our cryogenic systems are failing. We require preservation technology capable of maintaining sub-zero temperatures at quantum stability levels. Do you possess such equipment?" Marcus looked at Rodrigo. Rodrigo looked at Paula. Paula looked at Yuki. Yuki looked back at Marcus with an expression that suggested she knew exactly where this was going and was already exhausted by it. "No," Marcus said honestly. "But we have got food, lots of food, and ways to make it edible." Kletchnor's antenna twitched in confusion. "You do not understand. We cannot consume food that has been exposed to thermal variation. Our biology requires specific molecular states that can only be achieved through precise cryogenic preservation." Right, Marcus said, nodding like he understood while clearly not understanding at all. "But hypothetically speaking, if you were starving to death, would slightly warm food that would not kill you be better than no food at all? The food would be toxic to our systems. More toxic than starving." Klechnor paused. It was the kind of pause that suggested he was running complex calculations and not liking any of the results. "This is unacceptable." Cool. "Hey, what do you folks eat normally? Like what is in your food supplies?" "Cryogenically preserved protein matrices derived from livestock analogous to what you might classify as arthropod-adjacent fauna. Complex carbohydrates. Mineral supplements." Marcus turned to Yuki. "That just sounds like meat and vegetables." "That does just sound like meat and vegetables," Yuki agreed. "And you folks are saying you have never just cooked anything?" 472 Kolathi stared at the four humans with expressions of profound confusion. It was Klechnor who finally spoke, his translator working overtime to convey bewilderment. "What is cooked?" Marcus started laughing. It was not a polite laugh. It was the kind of laugh that erupted from someone who had just realized the universe's most absurd joke and could not keep it contained. Rodrigo joined in. Then Paula. Yuki maintained professional composure for approximately 8 seconds before she too dissolved into giggles. "You are having an emotional response to our crisis," Klechnor observed with the dry tone of someone who was not particularly amused. "I am sorry," Marcus wheezed, wiping his eyes. "I am so sorry. It is just, okay. You are telling me that your entire species mastered faster than light travel, quantum computing, and interstellar trade, but you never learned to cook food. We had no need. Our preservation technology is superior to primitive thermal application." "Was superior," Rodrigo pointed out. Past tense. "Currently your superior technology is a very expensive freezer full of garbage." Kletchnor's mandibles clicked with what might have been indignation, but the truth of the statement hung in the freezing air like their collective breath. Marcus pulled off his thermal glove and smacked his hands together, rubbing them for warmth. "All right. Here is what we are going to do. We are going to introduce you to the single oldest piece of human technology. It is called fire, and it is going to save all your lives whether you like it or not." The Kolathi watched in utter fascination and mounting horror as the humans transformed a simple clearing in the ice into what Marcus called a campsite, and what looked to the Kolathi like organized chaos powered by insanity. Rodrigo and Paula hauled out portable heating elements from the Wandering Kettle, along with chemical fire starters, thermal containment units, and several crates of supplies that seemed wildly impractical for a cargo vessel. Marcus coordinated the effort with the practiced ease of someone who had done this approximately 100 times too many. The key to fire, Marcus explained to the gathered Kolathi, who had emerged from their vessel partly from curiosity and partly from the realization that they literally had no other options, is that it is hot. That is pretty much the whole deal. Hot equals useful when you are on an ice planet. You are describing combustion, Klechnor said. We are aware of the chemical process. It is primitive and inefficient. Primitive, yes. Inefficient. Marcus shook his head as flames roared to life in 3 separate fire pits they had constructed from ice blocks and thermal liners. Brother, you are about to learn exactly how efficient it is. Yuki emerged from the Wandering Kettle, carrying what appeared to be a dead creature that looked like a seal, had argued with a lizard, and somehow both won and lost. Found these in the ice about half a click north. Local fauna, definitely edible based on the bioscans. Perfect. Skin it, butcher it, get it ready for roasting. The Kolathi watched in mounting alarm as Yuki produced a knife and began the process of field dressing the creature with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The fact that she was humming while doing it somehow made it worse. You are going to consume that? Klechnor asked, his voice carrying several layers of distress. We are all going to consume it, Marcus corrected. Humanity's gift to the galaxy, barbecue. Within an hour, the camp had transformed into something that would have given a health and safety inspector 17 different heart attacks. 3 fire pits blazed with carefully controlled flames. Spits had been erected over 2 of them, loaded with chunks of local fauna that were beginning to sizzle and pop in ways that sent absolutely divine smells across the frozen wasteland. The 3rd fire pit hosted a massive pot of soup that Yuki was constructing from human rations, local ice melt, and what she cheerfully described as whatever vegetables had been hiding in the back of our stores. The Kolathi crew had emerged fully from their vessel now, drawn by a combination of desperate hunger, morbid curiosity, and the undeniable fact that the camp was significantly warmer than their damaged ship. Paula had set up reflective heat shields that bounced warmth back into the gathering area. Rodrigo was turning meat on spits while explaining the concept of grill marks to a group of Kolathi who looked like he was describing ancient forbidden magic. See, you want these char lines, he said, pointing with his cooking fork. That is the Maillard reaction. Chemical changes in the proteins and sugars when exposed to high heat creates entirely new flavor compounds. It is basically edible chemistry. This is barbaric, one of the Kolathi observers said, but their antennae were angled toward the cooking meat with unmistakable interest. Barbaric is starving to death when there is food literally frozen in the ground around you, Rodrigo countered. This is called adaptation, also dinner. Marcus stood by the soup pot with Yuki, watching her add what appeared to be at least 14 different ingredients, with the confidence of someone operating entirely on instinct and experience. Think they will actually eat it? He asked quietly. They will eat it, or they will die, Yuki said, with the blunt practicality that made her an excellent medic. Biology does not care about cultural preferences. They need calories, they need warmth, they need nutrients. We are providing all 3. Their bodies will figure it out. And if the food actually is toxic to them, then I will have 472 very sick patients and a really bad day. But I ran the bioscans. Their digestive chemistry is not that different from ours. They evolved eating frozen food. Sure, but the actual molecular composition is the same. This is not poison. This is just served at a different temperature. The meat came off the spits an hour later, rested for 10 minutes like Rodrigo insisted proper cooking required, and was carved into portions that could feed approximately 500 beings with healthy appetites, or 472 starving Kolathi and 4 smug humans. Marcus held up a piece of roasted meat, steam rising from it into the frozen air. All right, moment of truth. Who wants to be first? The Kolathi stared at the offered food with the kind of existential dread usually reserved for philosophical paradoxes. It was hot. It was cooked. It smelled, inexplicably, incredibly good. Every single bit of their evolutionary biology was screaming that this was wrong. Their empty stomachs were screaming louder. Klechnor stepped forward with the resigned air of a leader who had run out of options. He took the piece of meat in his manipulator claws, holding it like it might explode. If this kills me, I am filing a formal complaint with the Interspecies Trade Commission. That is the spirit, Marcus said encouragingly. Klechnor ate the meat. The transformation was not immediate, but it was noticeable. His antennae straightened. His mandibles stopped their nervous clicking. His entire posture shifted from preparing for death to experiencing something his brain literally did not have context for. This is, he paused, searching for words. This is not toxic. Nope, this is providing caloric energy. Yep, this is, another pause, longer this time. Actually quite pleasant. Marcus grinned. Welcome to hot food, buddy. Humans have been doing this for about 500,000 years. We have got it pretty figured out. The floodgates opened. 472 Kolathi descended upon the cooking fires with the desperate enthusiasm of beings who had been staring down starvation and suddenly found themselves at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Yuki ladled soup into containers that the Kolathi accepted with trembling claws. Rodrigo carved meat until his arms ached. Paola kept the fires burning and the heat shields positioned, and Marcus watched it all with the satisfied expression of someone who had once again solved a complex problem with the simplest possible solution. The Kolathi ate and ate. And then, once their immediate hunger was addressed, they did something that surprised even Marcus. They sat down around the fires. It started with 1 or 2, then small clusters, then entire groups of Kolathi settling onto the ice near the heat sources, holding their portions of food, and just existing in the warmth. The firelight reflected off their chitinous bodies in complex patterns. Steam rose from the soup containers. The smell of roasted meat hung in the air. Someone, Marcus was never quite sure who, started passing around seconds. Then someone else asked how the cooking process worked. Then someone else wanted to know why the soup tasted different from the meat. Questions led to explanations, which led to conversations, which led to something that looked remarkably like communal dining. Your species does this regularly? Klechnor asked, settling near Marcus with his third helping of soup. Eating. Gathering around heat sources to consume food together. Oh yeah, it is kind of our thing. Humans are social eaters. We build community around meals. Some of our most important cultural moments happen around dinner tables. This is inefficient. Food could be consumed individually in less time. Probably. But efficiency is not always the point. Marcus gestured to the gathering around them. Look at your crew. They are not just eating. They are warming up, yeah, but they are also talking, relaxing, processing the trauma of crashing on an ice planet while sharing a meal with people they trust. That is worth the extra time. Kletchnor's antenna twitched thoughtfully. Our food consumption has always been a solitary activity. Precise, clinical. We retrieve our cryogenic portions, consume them in isolation, and return to our duties. Sounds lonely. It is efficient. Your efficient system left you starving on an ice planet, Yuki pointed out, joining them with her own bowl of soup. Our inefficient system has you fed, warm, and sitting around comparing notes on whether the soup or the roasted meat is better. The soup, Kletchnor said immediately, then seemed surprised by his own certainty. The soup is superior. My man, Rodrigo called from across the fire. Soup crew for life. The rescue ships arrived 18 hours later, which was precisely 16 hours too late to be helpful, and just in time to be thoroughly confused. The official Galactic Rescue Service vessel, a state-of-the-art emergency response ship, with all the latest technology and absolutely none of the common sense, descended into KX-447's atmosphere, expecting to find a desperate survival situation. What they found instead was approximately 500 beings gathered around multiple cooking fires, eating what appeared to be roasted local fauna, and engaging in what the rescue commander would later describe in his report as inexplicable social bonding activities. Commander Thexpole of the rescue service stood at the edge of the camp in his pristine emergency response uniform, staring at the scene with the profound confusion of someone whose entire worldview was being gently but firmly challenged. "Explain this situation," he demanded, his translator giving his voice an appropriately authoritative tone. Marcus looked up from where he was teaching a group of Kolathi the proper technique for roasting meat over open flames. "We are having dinner. Want some?" The distress call indicated critical food supply failure and imminent crew mortality. "Yeah, that was yesterday. Today we have got barbecue." You resolved a cryogenic contamination crisis with Thexpole consulted his datapad like it might provide answers. Combustion-based thermal food preparation. We call it cooking, but sure, if you want to make it sound fancy. Thexpole looked at Kletchnor, who was currently supervising a pot of soup with the intense focus of someone who had found a new passion in life. Is this accurate? The humans introduced us to a primitive but effective food preparation methodology that bypassed our technological dependencies, Kletchnor said formally. Then, dropping the official tone, "The soup is remarkable. This is not standard rescue protocol. Standard rescue protocol was not coming," Marcus pointed out. "We improvised. Everyone lived. I would call that a success." The rescue proceeded with all the awkward efficiency of bureaucracy confronting practical solutions. The Kolathi were transported to the official rescue vessel, their damaged ship was marked for salvage, and paperwork was filed in quantities that would have made forests weep. But before they left, Kletchnor approached Marcus one final time. "We have no adequate way to express gratitude for what you have done," he said, his translator carrying genuine emotion. "You saved our lives using methods we would have dismissed as primitive, methods we would never have considered." "That is the thing about humans," Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder with a gentleness that accounted for their different biologies. "We have been the new species, the primitive ones, the folks figuring it out as we go. We know what it is like to need help. We know what it is like to solve problems with whatever we have got on hand. And we know that sometimes the old ways work just fine. Fire and cooked food. And community. Do not forget the sitting around and talking part. That is important too." Kletchnor's antenna angled in what Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement. "I suspect our emergency protocols will be receiving significant updates after this incident. Make sure those updates include a section on soup. Seriously, life-changing stuff. The Wandering Kettle departed KX 447 6 hours after the rescue ships, departing with slightly less fuel, significantly less food, and approximately the same amount of determination and spite holding it together. The official incident report filed by Commander Thex Paul ran to 47 pages and included detailed descriptions of primitive thermal manipulation, unauthorized rescue operations by unqualified civilians, and flagrant disregard for established protocols. It concluded with a recommendation that proper rescue training be mandated for all vessels operating in frontier space. The unofficial incident report, the one that circulated through back channels and crew lounges across 12 systems, was much shorter. It noted that 4 humans with a cargo hauler and some basic cooking equipment had solved a crisis that had stumped sophisticated civilizations. It mentioned that the Kolathi had not just survived but had been introduced to concepts of communal eating that were already being integrated into their cultural practices. And it ended with an observation that was rapidly becoming common wisdom among the spacefaring community. When the universe took your food and left you freezing in the dark, you could rely on advanced technology and sophisticated solutions and careful protocols. Or you could call the humans, who would show up with fire and cooking equipment and an absolutely unshakable belief that any problem could be solved if you were willing to improvise and share a meal. The Kolathi chose fire. They chose warmth. They chose soup. And in doing so, they learned what 46,993 species had somehow missed in their rush towards sophistication. Sometimes survival was not about having the best technology. Sometimes it was about remembering that your ancestors survived because they were willing to sit around a fire, share food, and take care of each other when things got cold. Humanity had never forgotten that lesson. They had dragged it with them into space, along with their cooking equipment, their terrible coffee, and their absolute refusal to let a little thing like an ice planet ruin dinner time. The galaxy was slowly learning to appreciate it.